Hello and welcome to Practical 365. I am live with Paul Robichaux. Hello, Paul. How are you?
Hi, Steve. I'm live from the Rocket City, glorious Huntsville, Alabama, on a lovely autumn afternoon.
It is absolutely fantastic here. It's nice and warm, and I've mostly been watching Microsoft Ignite today. What about you, Paul? Have you been diving into all of that content?
I have been, and Lord knows there's a lot. Just because Ignite is not a physical event this go around does not mean that Microsoft has skimped on the number of sessions or on the production values. I have to say, just from a standpoint of everything looking shiny and chrome and well lit and everything, they certainly have done a good job. Everything
Yeah,
looks well produced and fancy.
yeah. I think the production quality is really good this year because it's a different way of doing things, isn't it? And it's been good to watch. There's been a lot of repetition though on some of those key messages, which you get when you're there in person, I suppose. It's just a little bit different to see as you're sitting there watching it session by session. So I'm pretty happy so far. About about one thing though, shared channels that didn't arrive.
It didn't. Um, I have mixed feelings about it.
Yeah,
So I understand why there's some technical underpinnings that shared channels depends on that are just not quite fully baked. And so on the one hand, I'm glad that Microsoft is doing the difficult, correct thing and
yeah.
saying, whoa, 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 we're not going to release this in its current form because it's not quite ready for prime time. I feel like we have seen a few other features, such as the initial release of organizational teams, that, they work 97% of the time. And that's okay until you consider just the scale of teams, the number of tenants, the number of users. Something that works 97, 98, even 99% of the time still means you're going to have an awful lot of unhappy or disappointed or frustrated tenant admins and users if you're not really close to that 100% mark. So I'm sure they would have loved nothing better than to be able to announce at Ignite, to the whole world, yay, we have Teams Connect, Teams Shared Channels ready to go. But the best we got was an announcement that it will be coming first half of next year.
Which isn't bad. But I was looking through Tony's poster. Tony Redmond posted back in March when it was announced that we could expect it by the end of the year. So that must be what Microsoft said way back when. And you know the sort of Moscow thing. I'm not saying that you're friends with communists or anything like that, or Russians are either. Stop speaking, Steve. But that the must-haves and will do and all this. I noticed how many of these things that they say we will do this by then, and I'm thinking they're digging the same sort of hole I've just tried to dig myself because will do should do could release this or we might be on track. So some of the stuff like early 2022, so we will by early 2022. You would expect that should mean the first quarter, right?
You would expect that, yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it means when normal people use the phrase. Now, we all know Microsoft,
Will do.
to put it delicately, they are masters of the well placed adjective.
Yeah,
So we have the difference between calendar year and fiscal year. And generally, when they mean calendar year, they will specifically say first half of calendar 2022.
yeah,
Um, there's the fine distinction between a quarter or a half year. But again, normal people don't usually spend a lot of time specifying that something is going to be toward the end of third quarter of next fiscal year. But Microsoft, they slice that bologna very thinly. They parse those statements very carefully. So if they say first half of 2022, what that tells me is they're giving themselves an awful lot of runway to reserve their options if they need to delay whatever date they have internally planned, which of course they haven't publicly told us. If it turns out that they need to pull back on the reins a little bit and fix a thing here or there, they have some latitude to do that.
so one thing that if you've been following along and seen my post early on the site, I broke down a lot of the key announcements, some of the stuff that's already came, and some of the stuff that I'm expecting a little bit later on. So we've got, I think, Viva announcements. Some of the big stuff was in Jared's session, just
Yes.
hinted on. But the stuff that's coming now and the stuff that is released, things that are GA, and then there's that roadmap session where there's going to be things that are announced that are coming a little bit later on at some point. So Viva, one thing that I've noticed is there's quite a lot in Viva Learning for free,
There
which
is.
which is surprising, and it is rolling out now. I was doing a chat. I was chatting with some customers earlier, and they got it before it's rolled out to my tenant, or well, to my work tenant. First question, obviously when people see it is, well, I've got LinkedIn Learning. Is it gonna come with all our courses? And that's one thing that I do expect. If you've got LinkedIn Learning, it's a pre-integrated app. You just see the default free courses. Otherwise, but I've not seen any documentation on bringing those in. But is there anything else that you saw in the Viva announcements that caught your eye?
So I like the direction Microsoft is trying to go with toward using Viva as a tool to let people have more control over their own time and their own schedule.
Yeah.
And so just from that standpoint, I think the more broadly they deploy that to give people awareness, um, the better. And the more they emphasize that, because if I'm honest, if I'm an average chief anything officer,
Yeah.
for the most part, if I'm talking about employee engagement, most often when employees ask about learning or training, you can sort of separate it into two buckets. There's training or learning that the employee wants for herself because it's something interesting or something that she believes is going to be beneficial to her career. And there's training that the employer wants you to have. So the number of employees who voluntarily raise their hands and say, I would really appreciate it if you would give me some training on the standards of business conduct, or I would really like some more ethics training, please. Not going to happen. So for Microsoft to emphasize that, okay, I get that there are, elements in their buying community that want that. Where I think they really have the opportunity to do something great with Viva is, and I'm going to paraphrase this loosely, but there's a gentleman named Ed Zitron who's a PR person, but has been writing with a lot of fire about the return to hybrid work and what it means, and how employers are acting and how they're being quoted in the media. He said something that was really good, I thought. He said if employers want to show concern for the mental health of their employees, they can start by making their companies better places to work. Now, on the one,
Yeah.
we could go in a lot of different directions there, but just from a standpoint of helping people understand how they're actually using their time, what they're doing during that time, and how to be more efficient or less stressed out because of it. When I looked at my Viva Insights monthly report for October,
Yeah.
I was absolutely flabbergasted to find that I only had 5 days in the entire month of October when I didn't do some kind of work during what were supposed to be my quiet hours.
Yeah.
Either I had a meeting, I sent email, I responded to email. Now, granted, some of that will just be quick on the go. I'll get an email from somebody in APJ and it will arrive late in the evening, my time. And because I don't want to block them,
Yeah.
while I'm brushing my teeth, I might dash off a quick response. I don't personally think that's like detrimental to me, but I understand other people might have different opinions about their own balance. I just didn't realize how often I did it. And so it's definitely opened my eyes to be aware of something I wasn't aware of before. And I think I don't mean this in a flip way at all. I think Microsoft is actually doing a very valuable public service by giving that data more broadly to more people so that they can see it too. I genuinely think that's going to help employees, and I genuinely think that helping employees like that is going to be beneficial for the companies that are Microsoft's customers.
So, I mean, I'm in agreement. Actually, one of our viewers, Emma, I think she knows my CEO, so my big boss up from me, from working for him in the past, and he's fairly keen on people being happy at work,
Mm.
I'm on a board, our diversity board, uh, at my work, and I was surprised, how much he actually cares about how people feel, and apparently that applies, across the board. But it's rare to sort of find that, or at least see it firsthand, and see that somebody, genuinely cares when they uh, uh, when they actually get a chance to share their feelings about it. So it's kind of a strange one where you don't really know whether your employer cares about your feelings, but then there's a big bit in between where ultimately there's so many layers in between what executives think and feel that unless that message is enshrined into policy and it's part of how the organization works, it doesn't matter whether the CEO really cares.
I mean, that's true, and that's another thing that Ed hits on is he says, when you see a quote from the CEO of a large company, he names some examples, which I will not do just out of desire not to make anybody needlessly angry. But he says none of those elderly white CEOs are in the office anyway. So the idea that they think people need to be in the office to do work is uh,
It,
counteracted or argued against by the fact that they're doing work and they're not in the office.
I mean,
But
it depends. The most random thing happened actually. Emma, who's in the chat now, when I was last in the office for the first time since March, just before I went into a meeting with Emma as a customer, our CEO pops his head in, and he was so pleased to see me. He was so pleased to see everybody who was in the office. To be honest, it's almost the opposite. I think it depends from place to place, but it's a lot of smaller, mid-size, sub 1,000 organisation, and that kind of thing where the CEO can walk around and know half the people in the
yes,
company, they have a different view. And as you go down smaller and smaller and smaller, then you get to company owners who are paying for that space themselves. And I did walk around our offices, and I know people are coming in. We've got great meeting room systems and all of the kit, and I can kind of feel for how why they don't why they, you'd feel that you'd want to see people in. So I think it depends on the different swing of things. Where you've got the big companies where, sure, they're not going to be in the office. They theoretically, I suppose, he or she is out on the golf course. But then as you get smaller, those companies do have a very different focus where they're paying for it. They'll have got rid of the office if no one was in it because it's just an ongoing expense.
I think at the higher end, that's really where the availability of the data that Viva Insights can gather is going to make a difference. Because at the higher end is also, if I can say it this way, recruiting and retention is less of a craft and more of an assembly line process. So if you want to hire somebody on your team, you have support in a company your size to do it, but a lot of it is going to be down to your individual ability to network, to find the right person, to entice them to talk to you, to tell them a story that gets them excited about what content and cloud does, and to get them to join the company. And
So
then keeping them is more, I think, about the individual engagement that employee feels. Whereas at a larger company, at an Avanade, at a Microsoft, a lot of that engagement is going to be driven by, hopefully, is going to be driven by positive changes that are made based on the data that comes back from Viva Insights about what employees are doing and what they think about it.
And one thing that did strike me about that, and I think we'll need to move on in a sec, I think, is that actually, if you're in a smaller, more flexible company, then the culture is massively important to maintain. Because let's say you talk about a place I work, mid-sized company, and then you compare it to a big company that we might compete with, then you have that thing where it's actually the culture that makes the difference. That's why people stay, and that's why it's so important. So things like guidance on helping managers foster better team culture, that stuff is probably quite valuable when it comes to staff retention for those kind of size orgs like ours, where you see that if the culture doesn't fit and carry on the way, and it's the place people joined and were onboarded to, we're going to have some problems. One thing that you mentioned the other day on Twitter, we were chatting about, and Emma mentions there's the ability to set quiet hours in Teams. I absolutely
Yes.
do that. I have two phones. I have my phone and I have my work phone. which is also the one I used for my iOS video on the CarPlay thing. But it's my phone that I use for work. The key thing with that is I split the two off, and I set quiet hours on that as well. I think that's a great idea. But when I mentioned about, well, doesn't everybody do this? You said, you were like, what? You're not connected all the time?
And that's true, and that is a personal failing. I'll put it that way. It's not a requirement that my organization has put on me. Although there are many organizations that have either explicitly or implicitly made their employees feel like they don't have permission to disconnect.
One of the Viva Insights pieces is the ability to recommend teams to have settings like that, common ways of working, but also to set that in one place. I think we mentioned that on the podcast before, but it's came up again in those announcements. So instead of as in the comments, you set it in Outlook, it's not so great. Then you've got to set it in Teams, and they don't really follow exactly the same method. Then that's going to allow all of that to work the same way. So extra value for Viva in there. Now
it is. Now we still have there's still another problem, which is if you happen to be part of multiple organizations, those settings don't follow you. So I turn on quiet hours at my work tenant, and that's all well and good. And then when Tony sends me a message to say that I need to do something for the Office 365 for IT Pros book, or Microsoft mentions an entire channel in the MVP team or something, I still get an alert on my device because those settings are unique to the individual tenants within Teams.
Yeah.
So I mostly settle on the concept that do not disturb or quiet hours has to be enforced at the endpoint and not at the workload or the application, because I can trust the endpoint. For example, when I take my Apple Watch and set it to focus sleep at night, it will automatically mute all the non-critical notifications across all of my iOS devices. And I'm far enough away from my Windows devices that I can't hear them anyway.
Yeah.
And just Microsoft doesn't yet have that same level of integration between the different pieces of their ecosystem yet. They're getting there.
I mean, I have to admit, I find that part particularly annoying, that it doesn't flow across all of the tenants. There's got to be a reason for it, but if you're a guest in all those tenants, then why wouldn't you want the notifications to flow through in exactly the same way?
You can make several cases about that. One of which is just they have bigger fish to fry. How many people actually have guest relationships at this point in time? And one is maybe you want them to be separate so you get finer grained control.
Yeah. I guess I'd have thought the default would have made more sense to be follow the main settings, unless you change your mind. I suppose it's an aside, really, isn't it? It's not the biggest thing in the world. Certainly not worth complaining about. Now, I wanted to talk to you about Loop. So, what are your first thoughts on Microsoft Loop?
Well, I guess my first thought is they really like the concept of loops, because we saw that in the inner loop, outer loop discussion about when you lose what. But let's not forget that fundamentally a loop is a geometric construct that doesn't go anywhere. So maybe, just in terms of what you can do with a loop, maybe that wasn't the most fortuitous name. And then when I see the video, like what you're showing, it looks like this sort of cotton candy Fisher Price horror show that's festooned with emojis and little floating icons and stuff that make it more difficult for me to take it seriously as a productivity tool.
I bet you liked it when you saw it inside of Outlook, when there was that fluid components thing that seems to be some sort of early version of it.
Well, I think. Yeah, I like the idea behind the technology that's powering Loop. The idea that you can have, for those of you who remember what OLE, object linking and embedding, if you remember what that was supposed to be and what it was sold. It is, but I'm not going to perform it. Or if you think back to to Apple when they had OpenDoc.
Yeah.
the idea of being able to have a single container that has a bunch of dynamic content objects that can be shared and manipulated independently and concurrently by different people.
Yeah.
That's the right way to do it, right? I mean, the technology behind Loop, which at some point was called Fluid Components, I think that branding is, gone.
It's still there. They're fluid components that are in Loop. So
they're in Loop pages. Is that how we say it now? I'm still not clear on that.
Confluence is what it reminds me of. That's the first thing that popped into my mind. But obviously you've got the fluid components, you've got the workspace, you've got a document or set of documents which looks like they're in a group. Obviously, there's going to be a going down the levels on that. And then the document, you see the objects that are links to the documents and fluid components as well, I guess. And you place those around. They live update as you go. So a fluid component would be a table. So I guess if you've had a chat and you've had a fluid component in that, there's a fluid file that sits in SharePoint. Bring that into Loop and then carry on working on it. Makes sense that way, doesn't it? Then the immediacy and temporary nature of a fluid component in a chat persists in your documentation. And then when you go back to the chat, well, if you're trying to find out what was said, then SharePoint versioning is probably going to be your friend, but you're going to have a moment. But ultimately, it makes sense. I think it's, how many times in OneNote have you dragged and dropped a document in to keep it with it, or a file or a table, or copy and pasted a table from Excel to get your data across as a little snapshot?
Not very often, frankly. I use OneNote heavily for note taking, but I don't tend to use it as a place to drag files in. And that's one of the things that occurred to me as you were pointing out the way that you might, change modalities like that.
Mm.
We live in a world where we have people who don't understand that you can use OneDrive to share documents without emailing attachments around to people. So when I look at the distance where much of the M365 user population is, and I look at the horizon of Loop, Microsoft and all of us as community people, we have some work to do to educate people about what's possible and when to use what technology or what each of the technologies is particularly good for.
I'm excited in a way. What tool to use when is never the best conversation. We've got Viva, where that's again a growing thing. What tool to use when, and what's the other one? Google Wave. Do you remember that? Not quite.
I do.
Not quite Confluence, but that was another pieces of components. I've not used Notion as mentioned in there.
No.
Michelle Deroy, Outlook Spaces on steroids. That sounds like a Photoshop picture for you to draw, Michelle.
And I thought steroids were bad, Michelle. I mean, come on, man. That's you may not be drawing the analogy that you intended there.
Maybe post a picture of a pirate instead, then, Paul. But
that's even worse.
But you'd have to be on Paul's Facebook, right, to understand
the idea behind fluid components. I like that a lot. I don't know. I need to get some time using Loop and thinking about how I'm going to use it and how the other people in my organization and then in my broader collabosphere, if I could say that. I mean, I have people that I collaborate with in my day job. I have people that I collaborate with for Practical 365. I have people that I collaborate with on the Office 365 for IT Pros book. And if you drew that Venn diagram, there would be some overlap between them. But because they're individual communities, those people are going to absorb or take up that technology at different rates.
Now, have you ever used a VR headset?
Steve, I have, and I'm going to be really frank with you. I was hoping that we would not get to this point in our discussion. I'm going to sound like
you can see what I've got queued up next
at the dinner table.
Well, I think you'll admit from when we had Jason from Accenture on the podcast that he's a guy that knows his stuff, and
yes.
that heartens me a little bit in that already they have deployed this. They've deployed 60,000 headsets. That's a lot. I mean, there's 500,000 or so people at Accenture that use Teams actively. 60,000 of those have got VR headsets to use this new technology called Microsoft Mesh. Now, this is from the keynote. This is Accenture using it. I think part of it looks like a bit of a mock-up, to be fair, but maybe not. But it looks pretty good. And AltSpace VR is what a bunch of sessions are in this week. It looks really good though. It looks better than AltSpace VR, which I know is, Microsoft bought that. You've got Microsoft Mesh, which is the business side of that. I like it in a way. And there's no creepy Mark Zuckerberg.
I'm thankful for that. Although I have to say, to me, when I was at Dell, I used to spend a fair amount of time talking to people about video conferencing.
Yes.
All the way from I have a $20 webcam using Skype up to I have this giant multi-$100,000 room-based VTC that has a complete room and shows people full body and so on. And so I'm kind of with John in the chat where he said, I don't see the business value. It's not clear to me. If you think about interactions as being a pyramid of interpersonal bandwidth, right? There's very little bandwidth in a text conversation. You see the letters that are on screen and that's it. There's no nuance to it. And then as you move to other modalities, if I go from just plain text to styled text, I get a little tiny increment. If I go to voice, I get a bigger increment because I can hear intonation, I can hear pitch and tone of voice. I get verbal cues like laughing or pausing or stuttering that may indicate nervousness or excitement. If I go to video on top of that, I get more bandwidth. And if I'm in person and I can see, the person I'm talking to, is he drumming his fingers? Is he tapping his foot because he's bored? Does he keep looking at his watch? And I don't think that these animated avatars give you the same degree of interpersonal bandwidth that a live video image of the human does.
In a way, there's a halfway house scenario, isn't there? So the beginning of that bit in the keynote showed the avatar feature. So you have an avatar inside Teams instead of your video. So if, like me, you don't always look particularly great, you switch the avatar on. If people get used to it, it'll work quite well. If they don't, maybe not. But it's better than no video, isn't it? On those days when you just don't feel great,
Well, that depends. It's better for you, right? I mean, it takes a lot of work to look this good, I'm just going to say. So it's better for you if you don't want to turn your camera on to be able to say, right, then I'll just send my avatar. But as a consumer, right, as a person on the other side of the screen from you, man, I could give a hoot if it's your avatar. If it's not you, then I'm just going to send that window to the background. There's no reason for me to have that window visible if I'm looking at cartoon Xbox Steve and cartoon Xbox Emma and cartoon Xbox Julian. And I realize that may be a matter of personal taste. There are probably other people who love it and think it's cool. I look at it and I go, yeah, gimmick. I'm not spending my money or my attention on this yet.
You will not believe the amount of time that my 7-year-old spends making avatars and showing me them as well. So got a fan there.
Yes.
She likes Teams as well, so sorted.
Do you work with a lot of 7-year-olds, though, Steve?
No, I do not. However, our last team get together, as a team, we all went out and Dan in our team booked a VR place in Milton Keynes, the US town alike in the UK, and that was pretty good. I'd never used any of that stuff before. I was totally sold, and I'm like, I'm going to go home and buy these. And then I looked at the price, and whoa, 1,200 quid. The kids are not getting those for Christmas. But it was amazing for the game side of it. It felt very, very, very real. And
there are some amazing things that you can do with the technology. I don't mean to run that down at all. And I love that Microsoft is broadening their platform to include mixed reality and to include these avatar-based spaces.
But this was a team day. This was a team building exercise where we were doing stuff together. And I suppose if you think of the that video for Microsoft uh, showing where we've got, what is it? We've got the high fives. I think we're using swords instead, but there's another one a little bit further. Table tennis. We were doing archery, and we were shooting each other. But there you could do whiteboard. It's different, right? And different's good. And
fair enough.
If you're a
There are
global
definitely gonna be
organization,
people who love it and want this widely deployed, and I think there are going to be people like me who are, maybe crotchety and mentally old who say, I'm not sure I see the value. So I guess we'll see.
We will, and I'm reserving comment. I see what John says. I agree. I don't think I'd look very professional in a customer meeting if I turned up as an avatar. My last call of the day, however, was with a learning and development team at a large utility, and the announcements just dropped. Book of news was out, which is good, so I could talk about Microsoft Mesh because it was at the same time as the keynote was on. To be fair, and one of the folks who introduced themselves said his focus, apart from the other things around HR, learning and development, was new ways of doing this. And one of the areas that he's been looking into is virtual reality. And this plays massively into where customers have got these problems. It's a utility company, right? So you're going to have a common challenge of possibly older workers needing to train up younger people. I saw during the pandemic, there was obviously people couldn't travel as much, and people are stopping travel as much. There's a ventilator project. There's various aerospace companies helping with that alongside others. Avanade, I saw something that, because I was doing Teams bits, they were doing something much more fun, which was all of the training for building the ventilators, and they'd done that using virtual reality or AR. So you'd learn how to build it because you'd have the piece in your hand and all the instructions come around you. That's the technology brought to life, and the challenge that this person had is solved. All the things that he asked and said, I've tried other solutions. Be interested to see how well this works. Solved with some of the things that they mentioned. So assuming it works as well as they said, works on mobile devices, works from any device that you go to. Don't need a headset to have a good experience in it, but will benefit from it. That ease of access, being able to easily, fluidly go into this as if it was like a meeting. And in this, it's a Teams meeting drop down. So if you've got the content right and it's worth going to, and you're going to gain value from it as a person, then you go to it. And I immediately thought of the one Alt Space VR session I've signed up for, because I am, like you, a little bit negative about these things. I wouldn't have tried VR.
I think you can draw a line between
the content.
I'm going to use this technology to collaboratively design ventilators, or I'm going to use this technology to collaboratively, examine and repair an airliner, and I'm going to have a bunch of cartoon Minecraft-looking figures standing around a conference table with speech bubbles appearing.
To be fair, it's better than Minecraft.
That doesn't do it for me.
I mean, it's better than Minecraft with shaders. It's better than Minecraft with RTX. All things that I never cared about before I had kids.
For those of you who get a GPU, maybe that'll be nice.
I bought a GPU. All of this is rendering off the newest Teams innovation instead. But it's the content, right? If you're going there because you want to meet people and you can't fly out and see them, then there's value in it for you, right? And I'm going to the Alt Space VR session because Michael Van Horenbeek, Peter Rising, and a bunch of others are going to be speaking there, and I want to see them speak because I value what everybody, these communities say, and I want to see the people and see them talk. I don't think I'm not somebody that could mill around and, I'll be going around with a bottle of beer going, hey, cheers, virtually. So that's not quite me. I'm shy enough in real life when I have to do that. So I'm not sure about in virtual reality. But Michelle DeRoy, anyone remembers Microsoft Comment Chat? Yes. Oh, HoloLens. That's the thing. I slip in my mind. HoloLens is what they're using. It's just very impressive technology for doing
It
real
is.
manufacturing stuff and solving a big problem in a time of crisis. But then on the other side, it's about the content. You go where the content is. So I got to try it before I dismiss it as a technology.
That's fair.
Um,
That's
so and I'm not. I wouldn't want the Facebook one. That didn't resonate with me because it's just a meeting in a room. This, yeah, I could see how that could work. Now, Teams Connect shared channels is not arriving until early 2022,
right.
unfortunately, which is not great. We'll wait for that. Webinar enhancements are interesting though. So
Big fan of those.
Tech, the Experts Conference, runs off a platform called C-Event. So when you folks do the next Tech, if there's a virtual version to it, then you're going to be very happy, because I think last Tech, you folks used Teams really, really well. Good moderation in the after show Q&A, good prep before using the live events features. C-Event is the platform, and then you've got that integration. So I'm quite positive about the first of those integrations, because I did worry that Microsoft would only focus on Dynamics. And marketing folks are not going to pick the Microsoft tool. They'll pick the best tool for them.
Yes, they will.
And that's good. But it does feel like live events are on the way out. Everything I saw in the demos today looked like everything. I think we saw the writing on the wall at the last Ignite, to be fair. But this is definitely that. If you saw some of the screenshots for the webinar features, then it is absolutely throwing away whatever last remaining use case you might have had for using live events. Just sad, but also kind of good in a way.
When you say that, I have to wonder think of how long it took Microsoft to get rid of live meeting.
Yeah.
Right. So
but we needed Skype broadcast.
I have to imagine that the webinar features, they're probably intended to get rid of live events.
Yeah.
But I have to wonder how long it's going to be before Microsoft finally flips the switch and disables the ability to run live events, and how long it will take webinars to get up to sort of that same functionality level. Maybe it'll be sooner than I think. I don't know. But judging by their past history of trying to do webinar-like experiences, there are a lot of moving parts to do it well. And some of their competitors, I was talking about this with Mike Weaver the other day.
Yeah.
He was complaining about On24, which is practically a national sport, right? On24 is not a great platform to use. But good Lord, it's been around for a long time. I was using it back in 1998. And it's still around. People
and it
are still
changed since.
It really hasn't. No, that's the bad part.
But he was moaning about the webinar
Microsoft
that I'm
has
going
had
to do
since
with it.
1998 to build a webinar solution that does what the market leader does, and they still haven't quite managed to nail down all four corners of the tablecloth.
I joined I joined the prep call for him about this webinar that we were going to do, chat about migrations and stuff. And oh boy, it was like it wasn't quite 1998, but it was there was that spell when people thought they'd build some sort of WIMP UI inside a web browser where you could drag and drop windows around. That's not what Teams does at all, actually. But just inside the browser, all these different bits, and you press buttons, and I've no idea whether I can be heard or not. And it's like, what the hell is this? And it's clearly been developed a little bit over time, but just not very well.
True.
But Microsoft are not immune from any of that, are they? We've endlessly moaned, to put it frankly, about what they have and haven't done particularly well in this space. It almost feels like everything's good when it comes to agile developed software where you get, you don't get a release every 5 years. But it almost feels like when they've got new features to launch, it would be pretty good if they did it that in that sort of way where you get that big thing where it's got all of that core stuff that you want on day one. That would make me especially pleased. But I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, let me ask, when you say you get all that on day one, who is you? I mean, you have a tenant in the UK, one of Microsoft's biggest markets, right?
Yeah.
It's really, as you know, it's fiendishly difficult to predict when everybody in an organization that's not all in one geographic location is going to get the same functionality.
Yeah.
But I take your point.
I mean, they say, right, 6 months from now, webinars launches, and it comes with all those bits. Because one thing they did well with Viva is obviously lots of little bits, SharePoint, home site app, blah, 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 all, come over time. But at least, they gave it a brand, and then there's a cut point where, boof, there it is. I think with things like webinars, then when you get very small features over a long period of time, it's not great because you don't know when you get that particular feature and if it will be there tomorrow. Especially when you've just got it. You go, I've got it. And then you open it the next day and I've not got it. Or someone else is doing the meeting. I can't see that either. Like, as I said with Viva Learning, customer on a call, they've got it. I open it and I'm on previewing, not got it. Said to Brian, my colleague, you open it, see if you've got it. It's the world we live in, right? Where you absolutely wouldn't expect it to be there on day one of launch. But it would be nice if it was. And it was a single sort of cut, so you can go and say, hey, marketing, we're ready to do webinars. Look at this. And if you look at this, you've got live events features. Like start the meeting, your pre-join experience. It doesn't look like a normal meeting anymore. It looks like an actual thing, an actual webinar thing. I like that a lot. I like a lot of the stuff that's coming out as part of that. The co-organizer role, being able to decide what people can and can't see, they're not started. The integrations with other platforms, the RTMP out, so you can push to other platforms as well. The announcements,
right.
Pre-Ignite. I don't know whether they're going to be repeated again in any of the upcoming sessions about, what was it? Native LinkedIn integration. The comments will come back in. I feel like there's so many different things. It's very, very hard to know what's actually here versus what's been announced. And I know I'm not alone. And I know Microsoft have got a good answer for that, which is, see Ignite as what's coming up in the future. But that said, if we're going to see things go GA that day and things not go GA that day, what do you do? I'm going to put you on camera for a second while I say goodnight to my youngest daughter who's at the door.
All right, that's important. That's how you know this event is live. Steve's putting his kids to bed. Yes. My cat is around here.
Oh, everyone loves the cat.
Yes, the cat is over my shoulder asleep in his dedicated cat chair. Humans are not allowed to sit in that because it has about a 2-inch layer of orange cat hair on it. And he turns out to be pretty protective of it. So while Steve's taking care of that, I guess I could rant some more about, avatars in the metaverse and how stupid Facebook's name change is. I'm never going to get tired of that topic. But, we'll wait 5 years and see how stupid it turns out to be in retrospect. From my perspective now, it certainly looks like an unforced error or sort of an own goal. But Facebook may have bigger fish to fry or bigger problems to try to solve than what they call their company. Emma, in the chat, you mentioned something about regional rollout and GCC availability. Boy, GCC is a really sore topic with some of the customers that I talk to, because it's often the case that a GCC customer who works for agency X wants to collaborate or communicate with a different agency that may not even have the same level of features, although they're both nominally in GCC. It's a pretty safe rule to say, when a feature isn't in GCC, of course, nobody will have it. And there are many features like that because Microsoft has not yet to the point of simultaneously delivering functionality into GCC and commercial. But it's also sometimes the case, just as it is in the commercial world, that somebody over here in GCC will have a feature and somebody over here won't, just as Steve was talking about on the commercial side. Super aggravating.
What did I miss?
Oh, nothing much. Facebook's going to go out of business. The cat has his own dedicated chair. GCC discrepancies are annoying. I think that pretty much covers it.
I mean, Facebook were first up then with this, with the VR events, or VR meetings, and then this week they changed it to Meta or whatever, and I was almost disheartened because of the sort of me as well thing with Facebook doing this. That in the keynotes, there was the metaverse as came up, which is interesting, and that Microsoft want to be the master of the metaverse.
They do.
Yeah. Did you see? Here we go. Where is it? I'll just see if I've got this. Metaverse solutions. Is this a buzzword that I've just missed? Because it sounds very.
Metaverse came out of a science fiction novel written by a guy named Neil Stephenson in, man, I want to say 90 or 91, called Snow Crash. He didn't come up with the concept, but he was the one who coined the term, the metaverse, for this sort of immersive 3D virtual reality analog that a bunch of companies have tried to build things to emulate. So, we had Second Life, which had a heyday, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. As Michelle pointed out, we had Comic Chat, which was, sort of, if you took the metaverse and squashed it down to 2 dimensions and 640 by 480, that's sort of what you would get. Satya's right that when he talks about metaverse solutions, I think what he has in mind are, solutions that allow people to work in some kind of visual representation of a physical workspace. Apple used to be really notorious for this because they leaned so heavily on skeuomorphic design that they wanted to make everything in their applications and their UI look like the physical object. So the Notes app looked like a leather notepad, and the music player looked like an old 70s stereo with chrome everywhere. And I think there's maybe sort of an element of that in this discussion about what a metaverse solution is, because there are problems that you can better solve with the metaverse, like we were talking about earlier, but in some cases, I think it's a solution that's solving problems people don't actually have. Emma, thank you for checking on that. I knew it was early 90s because I remember reading it not long after I moved here to Huntsville, and that was in 91, but I wasn't sure exactly when.
I was just looking at the chat here. I'm with Emma, and I think I don't know whether her org is going to internal events or whether it is external, but I was embarrassed. I think I said this on the podcast before, but I was embarrassed for Microsoft when they did the Christmas play over Teams live events. And I think it was a teacher playing a DVD through a screen or something like that, a screen sharing, and it just didn't work very well at all. It's improved a bit since, but this is over Teams. Going out, I mean, Zoom is one thing, but going out over YouTube, going to the platform that people are on, whether that is Facebook Live or something like that, that's all part of what you can do with Teams. So you've got more options for going a little bit further with that. And I wasn't going to mention it on the podcast, but I will mention it now. I've wasted more money. I bought one of these things. So Pat Richard, who you saw last week at a real in-person event, was saying these are great. So I thought I'd buy one. And then today, I thought, because you can get things on Amazon same day, even in the UK here, I ordered before lunchtime this. And what is pretty cool is where you see Paul on the right-hand side here. Paul is actually coming out via HDMI, via this card, well, not the one on the picture, the one that was in the box, into that Atom mixer as a video feed, full screen video feed. There's me, and Paul sees on the other end the big display of everything that we've got queued up. You can see we're on air and see the on-air lights and mixer stuff, and it's I think it's actually pretty cool. It's harder to work than OBS, and I must admit I was still trying to learn how to work it 10 minutes before we went on air, because all the bits only just arrived. It was delivery by 7 o'clock. I'm like, that'll be enough time. And I've got hold on, I've got you on two screens now. What? I told you I don't know what I'm doing. There we go. That's better. And I bought these as backup for OBS, because last time we did the live stream over OBS, things worked fine, but NDI I found a little bit unreliable. So that new hardware out, whoa, it's it just works. It works as they said it did, and it works the way that you'd expect it to. If I share my bit of my screen, I was pasting some messages earlier, but I'll just drag in a bit and show you alongside Paul. Then we've got this send video to hardware, and it sends Paul straight over, and then Paul sees my view on his end. So it's pretty neat. We can go into more detail on that on a blog or something like that. But I was immediately pleased to have something like that actually working first time. And doing an event at the last minute is not a great thing. You would obviously get it a few days before. You wouldn't order it the same day on a whim to try and do it a different way. But it's impressive how you can do things that way instead. MS's broadcasted general availability, scientific talks. It's a good way of doing it over Teams, because all you have to do is join a Teams meeting. You don't have to use some weird platform like On24 or and there's decent ones out there as well, like StreamYard. But it's just a Teams meeting, and I'm in favour of that, because it's theoretically makes it easy. The reason I bought this is because we do user groups. You want to do them hybrid in person. Can I make it easy enough that somebody, one of me, Jason, Wynne, Guy, Martin at Microsoft, do one up in Manchester, can just turn up, plug one of those in, presenter plugs their laptop in, we plug that into Ethernet, and then we've got out to the main screen, and then we can bring in comments like this onto the screen so they can be seen by people in the room. Seems like a good idea, worth trying, and it's a new use of the technology as well. So I'm going to give that a go, but it's one of those things that they've announced previously. It's just reached GA, and thought I'd just try and use it as a more reliable solution for the podcast. If you're listening to the podcast, then we'll come to the last 10 minutes of the 5 minutes of the podcast in the video on YouTube, and you'll see a picture of a box with a picture on it with a PCIe card. It's less interesting than you think. So to finish off, as we've only got a few minutes left before Ignite sessions mostly resume, got a few more announcements that we haven't covered. First of all, there's a lot of new team stuff. Little bits.
There is.
One thing I thought might get you going is send yourself a message in Teams. Message myself. Have you ever emailed yourself? When I do that,
I have, and usually when I do it, it's because I'm trying to capture a URL or an image on a mobile device, and I want to make sure that it's easy to get to on my desktop. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of different ways to do it, and some of them vary according to your ecosystem. If I'm taking a picture and I want it on my Mac later, for example, just letting it stay in the native camera roll works great, because it automatically shows up in the Photos app. I learned a long time ago how just absolute crap the iCloud implementation for Windows is, so I'm not about to put that on any computer that I have to use. Right, it's right up there with iTunes in terms of badness. So if I'm, for example, taking a picture of an expense receipt and our expense reporting mobile app or backend crashes, thank you, SAP Concur, then I need to get that onto the PC to do something with it. And a simple way to do it is to mail it to myself.
Yeah.
Would I send myself a Teams message? I don't know. I'm not really sure what the use case is for that.
It must be one that enough people have asked for that they've done it. Because there's so many things people have asked for in Teams, and
Okay,
they've never came, and they've went.
When you say that, Steve, I want to see the user voice where they've got 1,000+ votes of people saying, "Yes, please let me send myself a message."
Well, they're getting rid of that. Maybe
Well,
when they made the
for
new
good
one,
reason.
someone was testing the increment button and accidentally went, "Oh, look, we got 50,000 people who want to send themselves messages. There's a lot of lonely people out there in Teams world. Well, let's get it done."
Now, being able to delay delivery of a Teams message, that's really interesting because one thing we really haven't touched on is this new bundle of services that Microsoft is calling Connect IQ.
Yeah.
One of the things, and by the way, Garmin has called the API for their sport watches and fitness devices, they've called that Connect IQ for 5 or 6 years now, minimum. So I'm really surprised. It's right up there with Dataverse in terms of Microsoft names that maybe they should have checked a little more.
What was that?
Anyway,
it was called something before Dataverse, yeah, and it was turned out to.
yeah, and then they called it Dataverse, and the Dataverse people are like, "Hold up a minute."
That happens a
So
lot with names. All sorts of companies. Like
it
when they do
does.
divestitures, we've got a brand new name for the company. Let's get a tenant. Oh, it's not a name we can
Right,
use.
somebody's already got that.
Yeah.
So for Connect IQ, one of the things Microsoft has been steadily doing is rolling out these features that are now part of the Connect IQ suite, including telling you when you're about to send an email, hey, the person you're about to send this email to isn't going to read it right now. They read most of their email from starting at 2 p.m. your time. Do you want to delay sending it until then? Which is
Yeah.
brilliant because that's the machine helping you know how to float your email up to the top of that person's inbox
Yeah.
so that it doesn't get lost in all the other crap they get overnight while they're asleep. So the ability to do the same thing with Teams messages on the face of it makes you say, oh, that's great.
Yeah.
But then I think about what Teams messages are for. And so we sort of have the shared expectation that Teams messages should be treated asynchronously for the most part.
Yes. Imagine if somebody does that and they they're going to do this. They'll write hello and it'll say Paul isn't in at the moment, or Paul's away. Maybe you should delay this message. They delay sending a message till 9 in the morning, and they're not even at work yet, and they just get a hello drop, and then they arrive at 9:30. And you're like,
or because you're right, people are going to do that, and I'm going to hunt them down and punish them when I catch them doing it to me. But that's another topic. If people use that mechanism to ask a question or to send you something that requires a response, the problem that generates now is the notification system in Teams doesn't let me, compared to the way that I can filter and sort and search and have rules, all the things I can do with email.
yeah,
I can't do any of those things with Teams. All I get is a chat bubble where the number goes up according to the number of people who sent me messages. And I can't separate what would you like to have from lunch from turn in this data or you're fired from I have an urgent, P1 customer crit sit that I need your attention for. And so delaying the message so it arrives at a time when I'm likely to look for it just seems like it's worsening that problem. That message is going to get lost in the clutter no matter when it's sent.
The autocomplete thing kind of looks good.
Does?
I imagine there's going to be a point when I'm just going to start an email and I'll type hello and then just tab, tab, tab. Like I can do it on my phone. If I go and send Jason Wynn a message, I'm going to go type, hello, Nigel, this is doing it for me. I have a good time for it has to be better. Oh my God, I'll just send him that. I wonder what it is. But it's just, people do that all the time. The autocomplete and see what the AI does in your phone. It's got to be better than that. It is. Oh, it looks like you want to schedule a meeting. It's like a clippy without a UI. It looks like you're trying to send an attachment. Here's the one I think it is. Or you mention people. It's going to mention relevant people. Depends how well it works. They showed it in Outlook on the web. Will it only be Outlook on the web, or will it be on the thick client? All questions that I can't answer right now.
Well, I think you can draw some inferences, though. We just got Microsoft Editor in Outlook for iOS.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, I didn't read the announcements that closely, and I owe all the marketing people at Microsoft an apology because I've only just now realized it's actually Context IQ
Oh,
and not
right.
Connect IQ. So I take back me making fun of you stealing Garmin's name. Sorry about that.
Well, we can't edit this out now, Paul. You're
Well,
done
it's
for.
live, baby. That's what you get for asking me to participate in a live event. By the way, it's lucky. That seems to be the worst mistake I've made. But with Editor being live in Outlook Mobile, what that that sort of to me shows the glide path of what you're seeing in the client is a composed form that's hooked up to a bunch of back-end plumbing that you don't see. And when you type some stuff in it, and then the AI overlords are going to return um,
Magic.
some handles that you can use to interact with, whether that's a squiggly red line or a content suggestion, or hey, did you want to attach this file? Um, some of those things may be exposed as adaptive cards, some of them may be exposed in other ways. But I think that basic paradigm of you're going to put some text in, and then the substrate is going to magically make some valuable suggestions. I think that generalizes really well across all the clients. And I think that also means if you can make that work for one thing, it's probably pretty easy to enable new services once they're working on the back end. So I hope that means we're going to see all of these features flow across all the clients pretty quickly. I think that's a safe bet.
Now, I think this has got to be all we've got time for today, because Ignite sessions are already starting. I should be joining one right now. Well, yeah, they've already started. So we will be losing people very, very shortly as well. But thank you very much for joining us today live, and thank you for chatting along as well. It's been wonderful to actually see people live. We might try and do this again. I think this is well as a first proper go of the podcast live.
Since you have all this equipment, Steve, it would be a crying shame to just let it sit idle. I mean, I feel like we should do this, more often, just given your investment in skill and equipment at this point.
We will see. We will see. I have a lot to learn. I'm definitely the big amateur. So the podcast will, of course, be online, or if you've just listened to it now, it was online and you listened to it on iTunes, maybe, or Spotify, or your favourite podcast app. We will be back in 2 weeks' time, of course, with the normal podcast where we're going through everything in the roadmap, as per usual, that's relevant anyway, and anything big and new. Hopefully some new stuff will come out, and things will have dropped and arrived in tenants that have been announced this week at Ignite. So if you're listening to the rest of Ignite, enjoy, and stay with us on Twitter, of course, as well, and joining the chat.
Yes.
As always, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening, and don't forget to turn on Teams end-to-end encryption in your Teams tenant, but we'll talk about that next time.